let's just jump into this wonderful topic called kindness. What does it mean to you? How does it link to mental and emotional health? And where did you learn about it?
I think in terms of first encountering it, I always remember my nana and granddad, my mother's parents, who were always exceptionally kind to people. And it didn't matter who they were. They had the same very welcoming attitude to giving their time to anybody, either in conversation, in practical help, in explaining things that they knew about that other people didn't. And yeah, I think for me that had a big impression on me as a child, and I spent a lot of time with them as a teenager. I used to go and stay in the school holidays in the summer for as much of the school holidays as I could. And my granddad, I suppose part of it maybe came from, I'm one of 6 kids, so and my dad really loves sport, and I can't stand sport apart from motorsport. So he spent a lot of time with my oldest brother and a lot of time with the smallest brother, who were both really into sport. But when I went to see my grandparents, my granddad would let me help with things. So he was a really good woodworker, and he used to let me help and actually do things and learn things by doing things, whereby, well, in contrast to at home, where if dad was doing a job, you had to stay away and not get in the way and be a hindrance and slow him down. And my nana, again, like I say, she was just lovely, a really friendly, giving person. And it always struck me that they were very warm, and that, you know, I would like to be like that, even if I didn't really phrase it in my head like that. They were the kind of people that I liked and that I wanted to be around, and you know, they're my favourite people in the family. So I think that's my earliest experience, and then it is that experience of generosity as well as kindness. You know, this ability to give without seemingly worrying about it, wondering what would happen, expecting something back, just really giving in a genuine way.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say that actually where I first encountered it was, you know, family life as well, and actually grandparents is probably a very apt place to see it, because, you know, I remember my my gran and papa, as we called them, they were just such classic Scottish old people. You know, and I think if you've encountered them, you know what I mean. They were just, you know, my gran worked in the mill in Deanston, which is now the Deanston whiskey distillery, and my papa had a whole bunch of jobs, from being a coalman to a welder and everything else in between. But we're just so genuine people. Like there was no two sides to them. They were just who they were, and you know, all the way up to till when he died, my papa would speak to every single person with just complete like expectation of kindness from him, and kindness in response. You know, it didn't really matter who he was speaking to. It was often massively embarrassing as a child when you're walking anywhere with him and he's speaking to absolutely everybody. But I think seeing that is the kind of early example of that, you know, you can just, being kind to people generates really positive experiences around you. You know, people are friendly and smiling and more relaxed. And then, you know, definitely, you know, with my mum is also exceptionally kind, and she would really heavily play that into us when we were growing up, much to my kind of resistance at times. You know, if you've not got anything nice to say, don't say anything at all was one of our favourites. And it was always that kind of thing of, be kinder, you could be kind in this situation. So that was definitely a heavy influence. But I actually don't think it was until I got much older that I realized the power in kindness, and that it is really one of the most generous gifts I think you can give people, is just to be kind to them, because everyone's got really hard lives, and it doesn't matter whether you're super successful, your hardships are still focused on whichever environment you're in, and so I think that it's something that you realize is actually just a gift. It doesn't have to be asked for, and actually the best time to be kind is when it's not expected, or it's not it kind of comes unwarranted, and that actually it opens up so many opportunities for you, is that you build really authentic and trustworthy relationships with people. I think when you are kind to them, it opens them up in a way that sometimes otherwise we can be kind of closed up. It's a very quick way in which to build a relationship with someone.
Yeah, and I wonder as well, thinking about those early experiences and then of instances as a grown man where people have been genuinely kind. You kind of expect people to be kind to children, don't you? Because they're children. But and I know that doesn't follow in lots of lives, but it seems less remarkable in a way than when I first moved to Scotland. Quite a hard few years, and mostly self-inflicted from choices that I took, and I ended up really struggling with some mental health issues, and I had moved away from all my family and friends in England because of religious complications. There were no ties to them in terms of support. So I found myself a bit adrift with, no framework for the world. And also when I got myself into this sort of troublesome period in my life, I didn't really have anybody to lean on. And there was a guy that I worked with who would be in his 50s then, and he was from Port Glasgow. If anybody knows where Port Glasgow is, it's not an easy place to be from, and it produces very tough characters. And it's funny, we were talking in our last episode about being a gentleman, and he had a lot of the qualities that you would expect from a gentle person, but at the same time had been known to be involved in fisticuffs and rough and ready behaviour, and wasn't proud of it, but he was, he wasn't ashamed of it either. It was part of his upbringing, who he was. But anyway, I found myself in this situation at work where I was really struggling, and I was off with depression and some of the effects of that, and he basically lift you, and it's always made me think of, when you see a lion get hold of its cub by the scruff of its neck, and they just sort of lift it out of the situation and transplant it to safety. That's kind of what he did, because I was in no state to sort myself out, and he did. He just lifted me out of the situation. Him and his partner took me in their house out of Glasgow for a while, good couple of weeks, and just looked after me. They didn't put any pressure on me to do anything, to be anything, to give anything back. They just looked after me, and they were kind, and they were giving, and gave me space. And in a lot of ways, it kind of saved my life. And it also, like you say, Bruce, just opened up new channels of communication that I had partly closed off myself, and other people had closed off. And lots of people really struggle if you've got a mental health issue going on they don't know how to treat you. Whereas he was very brave and very open and didn't really worry. Well, I think he treated me in a way where he knew that he wasn't going to do any damage. So he was able to be confident in being open and supportive and realistic as well. You know, he didn't try and avoid the situation that I was in, and he didn't do that super positive, it's all going to be marvelous stuff. It was just real and genuine and allowed me to start again, I suppose, and to start developing a worldview that included me in that. But the point I was trying to get to in a very roundabout, long-winded way there was that as an adult, it's always felt very surprising to me that somebody can give you the gentleness and kindness of looking after a child when you're a grown-up. And I think it really does ring true what you're saying about openness and the opening of channels of communication and building rapport and building relationship that's strong and on a really good footing. So yeah, so I've always found it stunning that people do these things to other adults that they don't need to do. There's no family responsibility. There's nothing in it for them. They just do it, and it's lovely.
So I'm just listening to you guys talking about this, and with a lot of these talks, I suppose something is just evoked and then comes up. And I was thinking about my life growing up as a child during the 70s. And I must admit, I would like to have said I grew up in a very kind and supportive environment, but it didn't feel like that. In fact, the word that came up for me was brutal. And because I suppose, you know, we came in here in the 70s, parents had come over and they were struggling to make it. They were struggling to make a life for themselves and survive. And we were, let's face it, we were in a kind of pretty working class area where, you know, you're struggling as a child and then you're struggling with all the other kind of issues, especially at that time of the 70s. I mean, my children now live in a very different world from me, completely different. And I suppose I was trying to think of instances of kindness, and I suppose for me, I've only kind of been able to distinguish it as kindness many years later. In fact, sometimes decades later, and I've thought that teacher that was a certain way with me at school and actually sat down and went over maths with me, he didn't need to do that. He was doing that out of his normal school time, and this guy sat down and did that. Or when I was getting hit around by some bullies at school and some guy waded in and just decimated these guys, and I sat back and went, and I didn't quite, and I was very grateful, but I thought, you know, why did he do that? And I suppose now, decades later, I'm seeing that there was some kindness in that, and maybe that's what our natural state is, that underneath it all, if we really have the power to do something, that we can use it. I don't think everybody's like that, because not everybody did, but I think for me, it's like these rare instances where people did show kindness and you remember them forever. And before I came on here, I was thinking, you know, I knew you guys were going to be talking about kindness and generosity. And a big influence on me as I was growing up was Muhammad Ali in the 70s. And he was one of these rare examples I could see of somebody with strength but also kindness, where he could be gentle and he could be kind, and he seemed to be able to marry the two in a way that and I always responded to that. And years later, decades later, I got a chance to meet his trainer, Angelo Dundee. And it was a great experience, and I got a chance to interview the guy. It's a long story, I won't go into that. But basically, one of the things I remember that he said to me was that you get a lot out of being harsh with people, but you get much, much more by being kinder. And I don't know if he used the word kindness or he might have used the word niceness. He was one of these really tough, Italian-born kind of like guys from New York, and all this kind of thing. He was like one of these kind of guys. And but he basically said, look, you get a lot out of being nice to people. And I don't know. I guess that's one of the things I realized, that it's something about, like Tim was saying about this guy that picked him up when he needed picking up. And I'm sure there's a part of him that got something out of that as well. That nurturing part, that he got to nurture someone and got to see them develop and come into their own being in some way. I'm sure that there's something somewhere where he needed to do that as well. Not just needed to do that, but maybe that's part of us, that we need to do that for everybody. So I think the thing about kindness for me is that it's something about that if we all had enough money, if we all had enough whatever it is we think we need to survive, what would we be? What would we be like? And I think we would be kind, and we want to do that, but we're always thinking, I need to make enough money, I need to do that, and make enough this, I need to do, once we realize we've got enough, we are enough, then I think we can then, that natural kindness, I think, comes out. And yeah, I guess that's, that's there, I guess, but being able to find the right state where you can bring that out and let that be.
I think that's like, although anyone can be kind, sometimes it's like you need to have a privileged position in order to give someone your kindness. And, it could be in a situation where you feel as though, whether it's someone stepping in to deal with a bully or any of that kind of stuff, sometimes it can feel as like, I certainly feel sometimes when I'm helping people is that like, I just can, like, I've got the space to help you. I can do it. It won't actually, it might be a massive gesture for you, but it could be a really small gesture for me, just to step in or just to add my voice into the conversation, just to sway in a different direction, because at this moment in time, I've got enough, I feel strong enough to do that. Because I think that's such a true point about, if we all had more abundance, we'd all be more kind. But because we're fighting in a capitalistic, scarce world where resources are scarce, what do? We fight for things, and we almost like save kindness as a currency rather than doing it out of just genuine desire, which actually, funnily enough, all the rich people I know all have foundations, and they all spend most of their time giving all their money away because that's what they really want to enjoy doing in the first place.
That's so on point. And Nadim, I cannot believe you went before me, because I was worrying that the experience you shared, basically I had the same experience, and I thought I am going to be like this outlier between all of you. And I'm going to say something that is completely outrageous. So as I was listening to the conversation, I was thinking, considering the background where I come from, Poland, my parents came from nothing. They were very, very young. They were struggling financially for everything. They had it really, really hard. We haven't been living in a good neighborhood. There were fights, crime, poverty, You know, at school, people beating each other. I was in fights myself. You had to be tough to survive. You had to kind of just every day was a fight to survive, pay your rent and everything. We didn't really have a chance to be kind. And I was kind of thinking that I was listening and at the same time trying to picture, have I experienced kindness then? And I had to say, no, I did not experience any kind of kindness for the first maybe 20 years of my life. Like maybe I'm forgetting it because it's been, you know, a while and I'm, you know, getting old. But in general, I was literally spending about, you know, whatever, 20 minutes of this chat and thinking, do I remember one time when somebody did something kind from that, you know, a period? And I couldn't think of one, which is, I felt embarrassed or kind of, you know, shocked by just the fact of this happening. But then I kind of started to think, okay, when I actually began to see some kindness in my life, and again, that happened when my father passed away, and I learned about death and how fragile life is, and I started to understand other people, how they might be dealing with different problems like cancer, health issues, and I kind of shifted my focus away from myself to other people. And as I shifted that focus to other people, I was able to feel their pain a little bit and experience my own kindness towards them, or experiencing people's kindness towards me in certain situations. But until that point, there was nothing. And I totally agree that when we get this abundance and when we have our most important needs taken care of, then we can kind of be more kind. And I see it now where I've got a little bit more money, I've got a little bit more better life. I'm already trying to reach out to people who, you know, have less than me.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely agree with this, because some of the acts of kindness I have seen between other people in my life are from people who have nothing and are kind to other people. And I think maybe, Nadine, what you were saying is that we would be more naturally kind the more we have. So maybe it's more rather than there's no room for it. I think lots of people who have nothing and you wouldn't expect to be able to give anything, give their time, give their attention, say the right thing at the time when it's needed. So for me, maybe it's about, is it about selflessness? Is it about being content in who you are and therefore able to do that, or are the two disconnected? I mean, I think about it from the other point of view. So what stops me being more generous at the moment in my life? And I've always volunteered throughout my life, and for the last few years, I haven't done any volunteering, and I really miss it. And I was really annoyed by COVID because at the beginning of March, I was supposed to start doing a bereavement counselling course so that I could volunteer for a bereavement support organisation. It's all been cancelled and it's not looking like it's going to happen. It's really frustrating. But one of the things I have let get in the way of that is this sort of saying, right, I've got a young family, I need to spend time, you know, looking after the kids, being present for the kids, earning money so that we have a house to live in. But really, you know, looking back at the last 4 or 5 years where I've not been involved in giving something of my time in a supportive way, I could have fit it in. I would have had to move some other bits of the jigsaw around, and I would have had to pay more attention to managing that in my relationship with my wife, who's the mother of my little children. But I could have done it. So I have allowed that feeling of I don't have enough time to get in the way of doing something that's a really important thing for me. So, I think the goalposts have changed a bit. We all have very busy lives. We all have this, ongoing rampage of everybody else's life and what they're doing paraded in front of us all the time. So I think, maybe our expectations of what we need are a little bit more skewed these days and get in the way. But yeah, for me, I think we can easily let things get in the way of giving. And is that about generosity or kindness? And are the two the same thing or interlinked? Because for me, setting up a foundation and giving money away is lovely and it's generous, but it isn't necessarily kindness. And that, that's, I would need to know the individuals concerned to have any kind of appreciation of whether they felt it was out of kindness or just, the ability to share their abundance. And it's lovely, whichever way it is. But for me, kindness is much smaller and it's much more involved in human interaction rather than giving materially, I think.
Yeah, I would certainly say that. I think we can all probably say that when someone has done something in a small act, very unexpected, it's much more, those are the things you kind of carry with you versus like necessarily a massive big gesture in of itself. But I suppose before, when I was saying about having more space in order to give, it doesn't have anything to do with wealth or money, I think, because I think, as we all absolutely can see, is that some of the poorest people are the most selfless and kind, for sure. And what I mean is more like an energy reserve is sometimes what you need in order to be able to give, rather than just, literal material wealth. I think that, even if it's just because you've had an experience where someone's done that to you and you've built that up as a thing that you can now pass on and share and kind of like pay it forward if you like. But I think that, we've also got to think about being kind to ourselves, because, I think that we have often so many external things that we think about. But, Tim, you talk about, yourself and your family, and that, maybe there's a sense in like, the prioritization of who I'm going to be kind to in order to have the space to be kind, to be more kind to other people in the future, is need to make sure that we're good to ourselves. I certainly know, I think I've spoken about this before, but, trying to catch that self-critical voice in your head and thinking, why am I harsher to myself in my own head than I am to anybody else? And that I would often rephrase things if I was speaking to someone else in order to be, more considerate, but that I'm pretty brutal when I'm speaking to myself. I'm trying to remind myself to be nice to myself too, because it's the company I'm going to be keeping for the rest of my life. So, I do think that there's and balancing the fact that actually, just because prioritizing myself sometimes is more important for the long term, rather than what just others in the immediate might feel is expected of me, if that makes sense.
When you're all talking about wealth and everything, and how that's not necessarily linked to kindness and what we can give away, and I couldn't help but we used to have a little shop in Springburn, and it was like a little grocery store, typical kind of Asian sort of store. Used to stay up until 10, but we had no toilet in it. So my granddad would take me round to somebody's house, and I remember that to use the bathroom, he would take me round to and it was an old guy, blind guy, who had like a wind-up radio, and I was talking to my wife the other day, and I was thinking I'd forgotten all about this guy, and this guy would let us come around to his house, an old man, blind, probably been dead for decades now, and the house was kind of like, you know, it wasn't particularly well looked after, but he would give us that space, and he was let us use his bathroom. I mean, I suppose that's a kindness, and I just remembered this guy, like, you know, because we're talking about the subject of kindness, I'm remembering him about 4 decades later. I remember this guy, you know, and he had nothing to gain from us, you know, but he let us do that, and he didn't really have anything to get away. And I'm remembering this guy 4 decades later. So, you know, what can I say? I mean, you know, there's a saying that, you know, kindness to others is the rent we pay for our time on earth. You know, so the point of that is, but when you're talking about kindness, it's like I've not been. I mean, I don't know if, you know, I've never been in a sort of, very rarely have I been in a situation where I'm going, oh wow, that's so kind of you, thank you so much, I'll remember this forever. It's been like decades later or years later, or I've thought, wow, that guy didn't need to do that. You know, he didn't need to do that. In fact, I phoned while I was at university. You know, you know, part of our thing was examining people, and I would freeze up. You know, when I would be surrounded by the Lancelot Spratt types with a bow tie and everything, you know, consultants, hello there, you know, examine this abdomen. You know, I would absolutely freeze. And one of the guys there, very nice chap, he for some reason took me aside and said, look, let's just practice this stuff together. And he did not need to do it. There was no need for him to do it. He was quite good at it already, but he would take me aside and do this. Anyway, I remembered this guy like about 3 decades later, and I found him, and this guy's if he's watching this, his name was Bobby Clafferty, Dr. Robert Clafferty. He's a psychiatrist now somewhere, but very nice chap. And I found where this guy was, and I phoned him up, and he was like shocked to hear from me. And I said, look, I just wanted to say thank you for what you showed me that time. You didn't need to do that. There was no need for you to show me how to do everything and take that time. And I just wanted to say thanks and acknowledge you for that. And he was like, okay, thanks, great. Made my afternoon. That's great. And that was the end of it. And I don't know. I mean, I think a kindness, just, what can I say? It's something that I will say, I carry around with me. It's something that I remember, and where that's gonna, I don't know. I guess you know, what you do with it, I don't know. I certainly think I realize now that kindness is not a business anymore. It's not like I do this for you, I'll get this back. You know, maybe at a certain time in your life it might have been when you were kind of developing, but I realize now that that is not kindness. That's business. That's economics. And that as I get older now, I realize kindness is, like you say, you do it, you have no idea whether it'll go anywhere. Or in Punjabi, there's a phrase, take kindness and stick it down the well. I don't know if there's a Scottish version of that or a Polish version of that. Probably is. But I guess that's what I'm realizing now, that kindness is something that comes out from within. You give it away. You just give it away. And I guess eventually we give everything away. You know, even eventually we're going to have to give our bodies away and give them back to the ground. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know if that has anything to do with kindness, maybe generosity, or maybe some of us are going to have it forcibly taken away from us, kicking and screaming. But maybe it's better to just let all of that go when we finally get to that time, you know. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Alan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, obviously kindness is very positive, and those kinds of memories, they come back after years, and yeah, they make life worth living. You know, they are special. We remember people, and sometimes they help us in very difficult moments, or just this in this particular toilet one, it was kind of very practical for you, because I can see this as a real problem. And I'll give you an exact example with the toilet, because it just inspired me from the days when I worked in the restaurant business. But before that, I have to say, what is integral part of the conversation when we're talking about kindness is that, what do you do in a situation where you are kind, or you want to be kind, but you being taken, because some people will take advantage of your kindness. And so my example with the toilet is that when I worked in restaurants, as you know, there are some restaurants who will not allow anybody to use the toilet if they're not a customer. And I would be a manager on the shift, and somebody who's not a customer would show up to the restaurant and they would say, could I use your toilet? And then you have the opportunity to be kind and let them do that. And you know, there are certain situations where you just like, you don't really want to, but you want to be kind and you let them in. However, a couple of times it happened that you let someone to the toilet and they either absolutely demolish the toilet, and I don't want to even describe it visually to you what that means, or they use drugs and you would find syringes in the toilet. So what do you do in those kind of situations where you're trying to live your life with those high values, morals, being kind and letting people, giving them your trust, and then they, you know, use it, and you were not expecting to get anything in return, but at the same time, you might actually get hurt, you might cause damage. And some people are just taking the, you know, what?
I think that's tough, because I certainly know that in my experience of working in business, that occasionally people misconstrue, you know, kindness, politeness, values, purpose with like being soft in some way, and the idea that, you know, they can steamroll over you as a result of that. And I suppose back to what I was saying before, is if I let them do that, then I really wouldn't be kind to me, and I wouldn't be kind to the people that I work with. And so I almost are able to adopt a different persona in those situations, because I'm being kind on behalf of myself or other people, and I'm potentially being protective of that. So I think that's I suppose the only thing I would, it's okay to nuance maybe your response in different situations. But I actually find that that kindness and being kind of authentic with it consistently, even in the face of people who are being very cynical, even it's just to keep doing it anyway. You know, it's like almost that I've forgotten what the term is, where you're it's like you're kind of universally kind to everyone. It's like I've forgotten what the term is. They use it in schools quite a lot. You have to treat everyone with unconditional positive regard. And I think that if you take that on, is that you constantly unconditionally give people positive regard. It doesn't have to be kindness, I suppose, in the terms that we've spoken about already, in terms of actually going out your way to do something without any kind of obvious benefit to you. But if you treat people with a standard, and you treat them at that standard because it's right for you, it's not about actually always about what's right for them, but it's because it's right for you, then, you know, I think you can proceed pretty confidently. I mean, I think that it's...
What would you do in a situation? So I'll give you another very solid example. So I would be manager on the shift in a restaurant, and a person would call me and saying that they're sick or throwing up or whatever, and they're not going to come to work. And then, so you being understanding and kind, and, you know, a good boss, and you say, okay, I understand, no problem, take your time, get better, you know, you come back when you're good. Then you have another person not come to work because they don't do didn't do something, I don't know, they said my dog died or whatever, and you're being kind and you just say, yes, I understand your dog died, don't come to work, and you don't have to because, you know, your dog died. And then, you know, people start taking notice that you can, they can use that kindness of you and understanding and empathy to just getting away with not showing up to work. And not even talking about being weak, but just how do you protect yourself for that? So you can still be kind, but you're protecting yourself from people misusing this, because it's just, you end up having no people to work with.
Well, you know, I'll tell you my personal experience, and I don't know if this applies more broadly, right? But that's what a lot of people said to me when we introduced fully flexible working. And one of the things that we cited, that I always cited, was actually that if an employee came to me and said that they needed a day off because it was, you know, even their grand's birthday or something like that, that I would actually probably give it to them, assuming that they have the wherewithal to have thought about how they ask is an appropriate part of that. But also, you know, mitigating the factor. So, you know, saying that I need to take this day off, but you know, I can catch up on the work on Monday or whatever. Because I really believe that so much more in life is important than work itself, and that if I, as their boss, don't afford them those life pleasures, then they won't be able to be happy at work, and they won't give their full self to work at all. So it's actually completely selfishly in my interest to be kind to them, because it creates them being in a much better state of mind when they're at work. I've never been in a position where anyone's abused it, and that's just my actual real life experience of it, is that when you set those expectations and you set a peer expectation as well, I've never actually had anyone break that. And if they did, then you make it clear to them that this isn't the space, this isn't the environment for them. You know, if it's consistent. But I think if you treat everyone with unconditional positive regard, then you are able to at least engage in a conversation with them without blaming them, you know, letting them know that there's a pattern of behavior here.
I've got to just say something there. You brought something up for me. I mean, one of the things for me underlying everything is the idea of justice. There has to be justice. And you know, when you're talking about, I think it was Alan was saying, how do you stop this something from being abused? Like, I remember a thing when I went to Pakistan once, and you know, and I would see all these people, beggars there, and you know, you felt so bad, and I would you know, I'd give, you know, like whatever it was, 5 rupees, and there you go, and some kid would come up, and my cousin next to me went, well, okay, I'm warning you, don't give it to that person there. I goes, no, I need to give it. Look at her, look at the state of her. And he goes, all right, okay, go ahead. 2 minutes later, another kid comes out to the car, and same situation. I went, okay, right, there we go. And then another one comes around, and another one. I went, what's going on? He goes, just look down that alleyway. They go back, they tell their pals, right, we've got a sucker there, we've got that guy there, come on. And they would all basically tell each other, and they would all come over, and they would all come up. Now, I think from my point of view, I thought I was being very kind and generous. But finally, I realized this is a business for them, and they're telling everybody else, and then they're coming. And at what point do I go, whoa, hang on, and get wise to that and say, look, there has to be some justice here. Now you're taking the Michael, whatever. And so I guess that's where, you know, my brain has to kick in, and also I have to be kind to myself and not drain my battery, and even, like, you know, in a lot of the jobs that people do, I mean, you know, Tim, if you're going to do bereavement counselling, or somebody else is doing whatever, you know, that's one of the first rules, that you need to look after yourself and your heart as well, that you don't drain yourself giving to all these other people. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, I think if you're in the caring profession, you have to realize you can give, but you also have to give back to yourself. And if you don't, you'll drain the battery completely, and that's kind of important. So I don't know. I guess for me, there's an underlying idea of justice, and whether that justice is a natural justice or whether it's something that you have to intellectually think, right, here's a boundary, and this is what it is. I'm not sure, but I think there has to be some kind of justice, and that includes justice for yourself, whether you call it being kind to yourself or being just to yourself. I think that's kind of important.
Yeah, and it's a funny one, isn't it? Talking about work and kindness in the same sentences. They don't, historically there weren't two things that went together, and it's only really in the last 10, 15 years we've started to think about, does kindness have a place in the workplace? And it's interesting as well. I think the different kinds of settings make it an interesting conversation, because what Alan's describing are places of work where you need a requisite number of people to deliver a particular job. And if you don't have those people, then things start to fall apart. Whereas some of us work in more elastic settings where, there is no immediate need for that report to be done, or, that paper on examining something or other, or other kinds of jobs where things can move about around people's needs. But yeah, and Nadeem, you kind of beat me to it in this idea of fairness and equity in the workplace, that if somebody takes advantage, then their colleagues around them suffer because they have to pull that weight. And, if that continues, then something generally cracks. But the way I've always approached it is that if you are openly fair about these things, and you build a reputation and you build a team environment where people don't want to let each other down, then the ones who try and take advantage very quickly realize that this is not the place for them, and they're either pushed or they jump. And there's always appeared to me to be a tiny naughty corner, if you like. And there's been business studies around that as well. And in the 90s, there was quite a lot of business analysis that looked at, if you're going to deliver a business on the basis of believing in the merit of people working hard, you're generally dealing with, 95, 98% of your workforce want to deliver the best they can. The other 3 to 4% will try and take advantage, but they don't last long anywhere. So for me, it's always been about managing in a way that looks at the positive and deals positively with that 90-something%, rather than setting up rules and regulations to deal with the tiny minority of people who aren't playing along, because life's just much more pleasant that way for everybody. But I wanted to just raise this in a less work-oriented discussion, I suppose, and to see what people think about kindness being almost an absence of unkindness, and how that's quite a good start if we're thinking, I don't have space or energy or material things to give, so generosity is quite difficult for me at the moment, is a good place to start by not making that comment that's, critical or unnecessary, or trying not to snap back at somebody when things get a bit fraught. Because this is what I've got in our family at the moment. We've got 2 children, 6 and 8. And one of them is quite hurtful in the comments that they make. And it's almost like they don't know they're doing it sometimes. And it's picked up from some of the school behaviours of their peers. And it's also in quite a lot of, I've been quite upset to realise this actually, that there's quite a lot of fiction that's designed for 6, 7, 8 and onwards. And the characters in it are just not happy, cheery, childish characters anymore. They're how black the world is and wanting to take it out on people. And and it's been quite disappointing to see some of that picked up as opposed to some of the helpful behaviours. But for us, it's a start. What we're trying to do is say, right, and it goes back to what Bruce said earlier about, you've nothing good to say, don't say anything. That although that's an old thing that our grannies used to say, it's actually quite true. That the absence of a negative comment is a great place to start. But that's quite hard when you really start seriously trying to have, like you were saying, unconditional positive regard and always see the value in somebody without them doing anything, that it's useful to start there and say nothing if you're not going to say something positive. Is that enough? Is it, would it help? What do you reckon?
I definitely think that at times, like exactly as you said, Tim, kindness could be things like, saying things a bit differently, or sometimes it's actually just about listening. I actually think, listening is probably one of the kindest things we can do for people, particularly when through like social media, we're always on like project mode all the time, that we have no idea if anyone's listening. They might read it or like it or whatever, but we have no idea if they're listening to it. And so I think that those are things that we can all adopt more of. I think you could probably be passive, right, where you're not being kind or unkind. I think you could maybe be, but then it depends which the context, because passive could be perceived as very unkind in the wrong context. So it is definitely situational as well. Then I think that more often than not, if you can do something positive for someone, then particularly when it's it's things that are so easy to do, like letting someone finish their sentence, or whether it's telling someone a positive thing about themselves, a compliment, something they did well, or that you really liked that they did something, or whatever it might be. These are all small everyday things. I think that kindness is and it's infectious. So the more kind we are to people, the kinder they feel and they want to give it back. And I definitely think it's one of these things is when, even when reminiscing about when people have been kind to us in a long time ago, is that if that's stayed with you and come out, very consciously now, but how many times unconsciously has it come out over your lifetime based on that experience, I wonder? And how often do we actually carry these things without even realizing? And so I think that you could be onto that, something there to me, if we're not being kind, are we just being unkind? I'm throwing it straight back at you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes it's better not to say anything. My example would be, so my girlfriend has this thing where she occasionally or quite often drops something. She's a little bit clumsy, and the whole family would point that out and unkindly make critical comments about it, and she would feel very self-conscious about it, sometimes even to the point where it's really playing on her confidence. So when this happens in our house, she drops something, she breaks a glass, or she spills a coffee, or she burns something, I just give her a hug and say nothing. And because I know she said that to me many, many times, that this actually is something that is really playing on her confidence. I know I get to showing her basically that kind of understanding, it's okay, and not saying anything about it, and maybe additionally giving that hug, it really gives her this kind of safety, this comfort, and it makes all the difference. So yeah, I think that's to the point of not saying, making that nasty comment about how you see you dropping this, you doing this wrong, blah blah blah, being critical.
I must admit, I this has made me think of just performance as well. And what Tim was saying, how do you get somebody to realize that it's better to be kind than be unkind, or a young child. And there's things that, you know, a lot of ancient wisdom that have, you know, I remember there's this saying, you know, even a smile is charity. And I remember somebody doing this experiment. They said, look, just go around with a smile. Just smile at everybody that you see in the day. And then one day don't do that and see what difference you get. And that you actually, there's just much more positivity that you get back. And even a child could probably be taught to see, listen, just try that. Just smile at everybody as an experiment and see how things, and see what reaction you get back. And, you know, so I think there's, and you know, and I think about what Angelo Dundee said about, look, you can be critical, but it's better to be nice. And this is the guy that trained Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard and these heavyweight champions. So, and if he doesn't know about coaching and how to get the best out of people, and he's talking about using kindness, then I don't know who else is. And the last thing I was just thinking, which, funny enough, I was just taking on in the last sort of week or two, and then it's weird that this conversation has come up, and it's the Socratic questions, I think they call it. And it's like, before you open your mouth, you know, is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Or is it kind and is it necessary? These three. And actually, I don't think that's a bad way to live your life and see whether, you know, I mean, okay, it's true. Okay, well, okay, maybe true, but do you really need to see it? And is it nice to see it? Is it kind to see it? So I guess that's for me, that's a good sort of standard to live by. And I think, you know, not only will you get more out of life by using those concepts and those ideas, but I think other people will get more out of it. And maybe what you get out of it is what you get back from the world. So I guess that's, for me, I think kindness is also about performance and nurturing, not just for others, but for yourself as well. You know.
How will you be using your power of kindness and generosity? Thank you, gentlemen, for your feedback, your stories, your heartfelt explanations about the impact of the power of kindness and generosity. Join us in 2021 in season 2 of the Genuine Men's Chat Show, podcast, and Zoom Lives, now focusing on fatherhood. Share, like, and follow the Genuine Men's Chat on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Join the Genuine Men's Chat Facebook group to join other men in the discussion of being genuine men and fatherhood in 2021. Our motto this year is many men, many conversations. Have you taken your seat at the table yet? See you in 2021.